Hello everyone. Hi. I hope you guys can hear me. Uh, there was a huge break, and I actually moved to a different city, and got these many days to settle down. To resume the classes. And yeah, as usual, before I get started, any questions for me? Or you guys got opportunity because you had a huge time. You guys had worked out on something. Or you have any questions? Okay, we will get into the spring so that or we can take it offline. And I saw your email asking for the jar files of the spring, because I didn't have a proper internet connection where I cannot upload. It is actually a huge files. It will be mostly MB files, so I couldn't help you with that. We will look into that. All right. So I would like to resume from where I stopped last time. All right, and last time I was doing a servlet hibernate application, right? Servlet hibernate application. Oh, all right. So okay, it was the same problem. You still have to. It still persists, right? Okay, fine. Okay, we can look into that today. All right, I'll see that what is the problem because I think it was a problem the same. I think it's the same issue which we discussed, right? Okay, fine. We'll see that at the end of the day. All right. Yeah. Is this Pradeep, right? But you use a different login account today, right? Okay. So guys, the last time when we were doing one bookstore application, right? So I did that application, the bookstore application using JDBC, right? And the same bookstore application I did with Hibernate. Okay, I'm not sure whether this still, it is like a nostalgia for you, right? So try to recollect few things. What we did was, I did a login application. Let me demonstrate it for you. First, let me look at the tables what I have. There was a book.java, there was a user.java, and there was a purchased book.java. Book.java was representing the books, like name of the book and price of the book. User.java was representing the first name, last name, email address, password, gender. And then there was purchased book.java. It was holding the quantity and the date when which the book was ordered. Then as usual I have a DAO program, and in this DAO program I have methods, but if you observe I have an interface first, and in the interface I declared the methods like get users, get books, add user, add book, place the order, get purchased books. Then I implemented these methods. I have an interface and I implemented the methods. If you can see this here, we got get users, get books, get purchased books, and this is the only complicated query I have because I'm joining three tables. Because purchased books is a table which says which user has purchased which book and on what date and what is the quantity. Then here we have add user, adding a user, and let me maximize the window, adding a book, adding a user and adding a book. And also I have one more method which will say purchase the book. This is get the purchased books. There should be one more method where I return a logic to store the books purchased. Means it was not, I just remodified the program a bit compared to the one which I discussed last time. Yeah. To add a book, you don't need to log in. To add a user, you don't need to log in. To add a book, you don't need to log in. To add a user also, you don't need to log in. Let me use this. You have, here we go. Add book.html. Then you can add a book. Success.html. I think it's register user.html. Right. Success.html. So now here you do this login.html. Then you see two links. The books purchased by you. There are no books purchased by you. The books on store. So there are 4 books available on the store. So you can purchase, select your book. 20 books you purchase. of C programming, and C sharp you purchased 10. Now you go back and say, so this was pure JDBC. This is pure JDBC, which you guys are already familiar with. So you can have a look at the programming code the way I designed. In the controllers, I am not calling the DAO. If you remember earlier, within the controller, I used to create a DAO object and call the methods. I'm sorry. Now I'm into the controller. Here, I'm not using any DAO. Rather, I'm creating a service object, and that too I'm creating a interface reference. I'm storing the implementation object. Alright, understand the way I'm doing it. This will help you understand the Spring framework better. Here, I'm not creating the object of the service class. I'm creating the object of the service class, but I'm storing into the interface reference. Then after that, on the service, I'm calling a method. Now, in that service method, I'm using a DAO object. Then I'm calling the methods. So your controller is not depending on the DAO. Your controller is invoking the service layer, and your service layer is performing the task for you, and your service layer is consuming a DAO object. Earlier, controller used to consume the DAO. Now controller consuming the service, and service is consuming the DAO. So you have one more layer in between the controller and the DAO. That's called as a service layer, to ensure that there is a loose coupling between the components. You will understand the reason for I'm using the service layer in the next example. Because in this example, the service layer is doing what? It's just calling the DAO method. In this example, the service layer is doing what? It's just calling the DAO methods. It's just invoking the DAO methods. Your service layer is just invoking the DAO methods. So there is no significant contribution of the service layer here. But when you look at the next example, then you'll understand the significance of the service layer. So the same example, I did it with the Hibernate. But this time, you see extra package here. There is a domain package, there is a DTO package. This is something which you need to focus. Why there is a DAO package, why there is a domain package, and why there is a DTO package. As you know, what is Hibernate? Hibernate is an ORM mapping framework, object relational mapping. What is this object relational mapping? In JDBC, we map table and Java object inside a Java program. In JDBC, we map Java object with a table in a DAO program. But that is something which is reusable, and you need to map it for every task. You need to map it for insert, you need to map it for delete, you need to map it for insert, you need to map it for delete, you also need to map it for retry, you also need to map it for update. So you need to do this every time, this mapping. So what is the advantage or what is the significance of Hibernate? You do mapping only once. You do mapping only once, right? And you enjoy the benefits of that mapping every time. So object is mapped to a table only once in the form of XML or in the form of annotation. So if somebody says hibernate 3, it's annotations. If somebody says anything less than hibernate 3, it's XML based mapping. So we discussed both XML based hibernate, and we also discussed annotation based hibernate. So forget about XML based annotation hibernate. Let's focus on annotation based. Now I'm using a book.java and I'm also using a user.java. The thing is, I'm using annotations for mapping. When I'm using annotations for mapping, this annotation belongs to a persistence API. Now, what exactly we try to ensure? We ensure that the layers are independent. We ensure that the layers are independent. That is, we have how many layers? We have a presentation layer. Presentation layer talks to the controller. Controller talks to the service. Service talks to the persistence. I reiterate, your HTML, the things which we see on the web page, is your presentation. Your presentation layer, when you click on the button, it talks to what? It talks to the controller. The controller, earlier it was directly calling the DAO. Now controller is calling the service and service is calling the DAO. So we divided our architecture into layered architecture. What is the why did we do that? Why we divided it into layered architecture? What is the reason behind putting them into a layered architecture? So that there is no dependency. So that there is a loose coupling between the components. So that there is a loose coupling between the components. But what is happening when we are trying to aim at loose coupling? That's what we aim at. But now, I have this book and user.java, and in this book and user.java, I am using some annotations to map object to a table. And these annotations belong to a jar file called javax.persistence. There is a persistence library available for you. Now, if you want to use the same objects the way book and user, if you want to use the same objects book and user across all the layers, then you are making them dependent on this jar files. Means if you want to use this book.java and user.java on the presentation, because on the presentation what you want to populate? You want to populate the data. But data is available in what? Book and user. But this book and user are dependent on what? This jar file. So your presentation layer is dependent on persistence jar file. Your controller is dependent on persistence jar file. Service is dependent on persistence jar file. And DAO depends on persistence jar file. So what is happening? Your jars, means you are depending on a jar file which has nothing to do with the presentation, nothing to do with the controller. But since because you want to populate the data on the presentation, you need this jar file. So that's the reason what I did is, I have two different data objects. One data object is to transfer the data, other data object is for the hibernate. So the one which are inside a domain, they are used by your persistence layer, that is your DAO. The one which are in the domain, they are used by your persistence layer. But the one which is in the DTO, see, there is no mapping here. The one which is in the DTO, they are used by your controller and the presentation. So your presentation layer and controller layer, they make use of the DTO objects. And your persistence layer, they make use of the domain objects. Now thing is, who will transfer the data from, that is, who will copy the data of DTO to domain And who will copy the data of domain to DTO? Right? Because your controller is using what? DTO. Your Hibernate is using what? Domain objects. But the data should be copied from one object to another. The data should be copied from one object to another. That is, the data of the DTO should be copied to domain, and data of the domain should be copied to DTO. So here, a user can purchase many books, and each book can be bought by many users. So it's a many-to-many mapping. So you can look at this. ID, generated value, column, many-to-many, join table. This is something which I already discussed for you before. User. But here there is a challenge. What is the challenge was? Because you are using, okay, let me show you the service layer also. Now here this service layer is doing a lot of stuff. When I say get users, just look at the JDBC program. Look at the JDBC program and look at the get users. In the JDBC, sorry, it's in the service program there is a method called get users. There is only a single line of code called get users. Whereas the same service in Hibernate, what is happening? The same service in Hibernate, it's not a single line of code. Why? Because your domain objects should be copied into DTO objects. When you say get users on DAO, you get domain objects, not DTO objects. Now whatever the data which you have in the domain user, you should be copying into a DTO user. And you should be returning the DTO user. I hope you understood the significance of the service layer now. Right. What is the service layer doing it for you now? It is doing the task of copying the data from DTO to domain and domain to DTO. But this doesn't mean that you will be in an assumption, it doesn't mean that you should be in an assumption that, oh, the service layer job is only to copy the data from DTO to domain. Oh, it's not the case. So whatever it is a service layer, it can do any kind of service for you. Now, for time being, what is the service it is doing for me is, it is copying the data from DTO to domain. So similarly, you can do any kind of business logic, any kind of logic over here in the service layer. Right. So it has to help you, the service layer has to help you in communicating the controller with your DAOs. Now here there is only obstacle was because I was using this domain objects, and I'm depending on what? I'm using the domain objects and I'm depending on the Hibernate for database operations, and I'm using a many-to-many mapping. And in many-to-many mapping, actually you need a purchase book. I mean, what is the quantity purchased and when it was purchased. But since this actually it is a many-to-many mapping, so I already discussed this stuff for you. Whenever it's a many-to-many mapping, there is a book, there is a user, ID, name, price. There is a user, ID, name, email, some XYZ. Now I want to know which user has purchased how many books. Then I need a third table to store this data. Book ID, user ID. Book ID, user ID. But thing is, now earlier when I was using JDBC, this table is not auto-generated. This table was created by me. So I added few more columns like quantity, order date. I added few more columns, book ID, user ID, quantity and order date. If I do it manually using JDBC. But since I'm using Hibernate and I'm using this many-to-many mapping, the table is auto-generated. And the table gets generated with book ID and user ID. You don't get the quantity column, you don't get the order date column. You don't get the order date column, you don't get the quantity column. Right? But that doesn't make sense for me. What I do with only user ID and book ID when I don't know how many books the user purchased and on what date he purchased. Now this will give me only information about what? It gives me information only about the who purchased what book. Who purchased what book, it will tell you. It won't tell you how many books he purchased. It won't, I mean, when I say how many, quantity of the books purchased, number of books he purchased, and when he purchased. That information is not revealed here. Did you guys face this problem? Or you are hearing this problem for the first time? Did you guys come across this concern before, or are you hearing it for the first time? Suman, did you got a chance to experiment the same activity, because this is your activity, right? So did you got a chance to experiment with the Hibernate, the same activity? Okay. Okay, you did just login part and registration with the Hibernate. Okay, fine. Right. So anyhow, I'll help you with the code. Just try to observe what's happening here. Right? And okay. So username will be unique in the user table, but it cannot be in the book underscore user table, right? Here it cannot be unique. Of course, it will be unique over here. The user table name will be unique. The book table ID will be unique. But not in the book underscore user table, because a user can purchase many books. A user can purchase many books. So when I use this many-to-many annotations part, right, the tables get generated automatically, and this auto-generated table will have only the two columns. That is primary key from the book table and primary key from the user table. And this combination can repeat. I mean, what I say, yeah, this is what? Book ID, user ID. Book ID, user ID. So we don't mind doing this. But the thing is, I'm a user, purchased this book. How many? 5 on XYZ date, that is 10th September 1985. But later on I would like to purchase more copies. So nobody should stop me from doing that. 10 copies. That was on some other date, or maybe on the same date. It should be allowing you. Right? It should be allowing you. This should not stop you from doing this. Book underscore user. Okay. So, but because the table is auto-generated, these columns are not there in the Hibernate. So without that, I did this example. The bookstore underscore Hibernate. It won't give you the third column. That is, it won't give you the extra column. Without extra columns, I did this example. So you can observe this code later on. Then I want to use Hibernate and I want to use many-to-many mapping but I want those extra columns. Now what is my next requirement is, I want to use Hibernate. I want the table to be auto-generated. That is the third table to be auto-generated. But I want those extra columns here. I want those extra columns here. So I achieved that. How? If you look at this, means I just created it. There is a lot of things you need to do. I just showed you how do we get this. I have not completed the service part. I have not completed the DAO part yet. Of course, DAO part there will be no changes. But service part you need to work on a bit. Okay, I didn't complete the service part. But look at this domain. Now you don't have two Java programs. You have almost 4 Java programs. But the table will be auto-generated with 4 columns or whatever the columns you requested for. So there is a book.java as usual. And here there is a instead of many to many, I'm doing one to many. But there is a difference to it. You are doing earlier, if you observe your earlier example, you are doing book was doing many to many with user. In the book you have many to many with the user. In the user you have many to many with the book. Right. But here you have an extra Java program called purchase.book.java. That is when you want a third column. When you want a third column, you have extra program called purchase.book.java. Now in this purchase.book.java, you have what? Purchase.book ID. So you need to develop one more program. So totally there are 4 programs you needed. Two Java programs you already know, the book and the user. So in addition, you need 2 more programs. One is purchase.book. Another one is purchase.book ID. So here purchase.book, and in that purchase.book you need a quantity and order date. You need a quantity and the order date, right? And what are you doing? Now the book is mapped. The book is not mapped to user. The book is mapped to purchase.book. You see this. Similarly, the user is also mapped to purchase.book. The user is also mapped to a purchase.book. Now in this purchase.book, you are using a purchase.book ID.java, whereas this purchase.book ID.java got a book variable and a user variable and getters and setters to it. So through this approach, I somehow accomplished 2 extra columns in the auto-generated table. 2 extra columns in the auto-generated table. So you can have a look at this piece of code to see how do we. I just show you the tables which I created. ib_book, ib_user, ib_users_book. This is your user table. This is your book table. What is on the table? Users_book. Book ID and user ID. This is your third table one. Now what I do is, I close this application and I run the previous application without third column. I run the previous application without third column. Then you'll understand. Let me go back here. Let me modify. Instead of update, let me do create. Okay. Let me first add it. Because I'm doing a create. The name of the book and the price. That is already here. Now let's start looking at this. So the table, okay, this table has not got destroyed. Okay, Kubba underscore book. It is still showing the previous table. This is the user table. Okay. You added a book. Let's register a user also. Let's add one more book. Then we say register user. Register user dot. Yeah. So you also have a user here. Now let me log in. Oh, no user found with a given details. Okay, let me check. Select okay. Dot select email address from HIV underscore user. So we have an insert statement there. Oh, the thing is, you just call create every time. That is a problem. Register success. I need to do this. I should change back to update, right? Otherwise, every time it drops the tables and creates new one for you. Now you don't find a problem. You have a user. Let me add books to it. The name of the book. Let me add one more. Perfect. Now you should be able to see this. Now let's get back and say is that login.html. Now I'm purchasing the book. But okay, now let's go back and see what is happening here. BSC HIB underscore user underscore. What do you see? You see only book ID and user ID. You don't see the quantity and you don't see the order date because it's auto-generated tables, and when it is auto-generated tables, they don't consider the third column. If you want to add extra columns to those auto-generated table, then you need to follow this example: bookstore underscore hibernate underscore third, where along with the book.java and user.java, I ended up in creating two more classes to help to add more columns to the auto-generated third table. Guys, did you understood the scenario and the solution? Of course, unless and until you look at the solution, you don't have a clarity on it. Oh, what query? I just checked actually. I got it all the queries. Just look at the service layer. It's up to you. You can do a lot of stuff. Different ways of doing it. Let's look at the DAO. Yeah, I'm getting all the users. I'm getting all the users, and you need to validate it, right? Get user, get this. Add user, add this. Place order. I think let me look at the controller program. It's login server. Yeah, I think I'm fetching all the users. I'm checking for the existence user. You can write it in a different way. I use this. I fetched all the users, and I'm checking whether that user exists in that list or not. Or else you can also use, right, we have this query. We did hibernate SQL, where I told you that. You can also do this. You can write a query this way. So we have session dot create query. I remember I discussed these things. So you have to write user, not the table name. This is the object name. Use dot email address. And for this question marks, we can set the values, right? We have parameter setting. There is session dot create query. Query dot set parameter. The parameter number starts with 0 here, and you can pass whatever the email address you have in double quote. Then query dot set parameter. One comma and whatever the password you have. Then still you say query dot list, but you know that email address is unique, but you still get list of type user. Actually it gives you of type object. You need to convert it. And you know that there is only one record. List of set of 0. Because email address is unique. Now you can check here if it is not null, or there is a record for you, right, get of 0, or you can check whether the list size is greater than 0 or not. So the list dot size greater than equal to 1, then you can say the user exists. Yeah, you see, it can be question mark, or you can also use, actually when you want to use a variable, this is how you use it. And this becomes, now here when you are passing set parameter, whatever the here this name you use here, right, that becomes your first argument, and your value becomes second argument. Just have a look at the few examples we did, and that will give you clarity. I think we did some examples on when I was doing this Hibernate examples. No, that was fine. See, you have different ways of doing it. Anything will do good. Alright guys, so I hope everybody is familiar with what exactly, I mean everybody has an understanding of what I am trying to do, what I try to do with the JDBC, what I try to do with the Hibernate, what was the problem I faced, then how did I overcome the problem. So these three examples, I hope everybody has an understanding of what these three are, and I will be forwarding those examples. Just try to run those programs and see how it shaped up, how application has shaped up. So any other questions with respect to Hibernate for me? Alright, so then I think you got enough time and you worked a lot on these things and you are comfortable with the Hibernate. Fine, so let's move on to the next thing called Spring. Somebody has a question. Uh, no. We should not do that, right? There should be a consistency in the application. You can do it. Nobody gonna stop you. You can combine Hibernate. You can also combine JDBC, but that doesn't make sense. When we follow actually before we start developing, there should be architecture for the project. There should be architecture for the application. So in the architecture for the application, when you put Hibernate as well as JDBC, your client will have a first question: why both? And what you're gonna answer? Then client says, if Hibernate has a limitation, then why do we use it? So first we need to specify the architecture. So let me show you. I think I should have one of the architecture diagrams. I used it. I don't think I have it here. Okay, let me take a screen. So what we do is we first put the architectures actually when we take a project. Okay. So this is my presentation layer. So to develop this presentation layer, I'll be using HTML, I'll be using CSS, and I'll be using a JavaScript to validate. Right. I'll make Ajax to validate, and I'll be using Ajax. I'll be using a JSP, or I'll be using a JSQL, or I'll be using a JSON. So whatever the technologies you're going to use for presentation, you'll be specifying here. Then what next? So this is on the browser side. Then rest of the things will be on the server. Now on the server, what are you going to do? So you can use any server. You can use a Apache Tomcat, or you can use IBM WebSphere, or you can use Oracle WebLogic. It's up to you. Now here, what you're going to do, use your controller. So what you're going to use for controller? Now I'm using a plain servlets. I'm using a plain servlets for controller. Okay. I'm not going to use anything else. Now is your controller directly talking to anything? Yeah. My controller is talking to the service. My controller is talking to the service. What is your service? My controller is talking to the service. It's a pure Java. You have a service. It's a pure Java SE. And you know what? So my services talk to DA. My services talk to DA. Now here I need to specify what I'm going to use for DA. For DA, I'll say Hibernate. If I write something like this, then there will be a first question, why both? Actually, we are using Hibernate to overcome the difficulties of the JDBs. And if you want to use both, then what is the point of using Hibernate? Only go with JDBs. Then at the bottom of the page, you're going to have your database. There is no cylinder here. Just put this. So it will not be in your application layer. It will not be in your WebLogic server or something. So there will be a two-way communication. Your browser talks to the server on the server it talks to the controller, and your controller talks to the service, and your service talks to your persistence, and your persistence may store the data into the database or read the data from the database. It can be anything. So this kind of architecture we need to specify actually before we start the project. We need to tell at what layer what we're going to use. Alright. So guys, any other questions before I jump into the Spring framework? Yeah, that was fine. Fine then, okay. Let's get into the Spring. Before we get into the Spring, let's discuss why do we need a Spring framework. Or we just discuss the basic principle of Spring first. Now I was shouting all these days, right from the day of when we started doing the web applications, or maybe yeah. So I was trying to say that okay, there should be a loose coupling, there should be a layers, but the question is, I said I'm trying to ensure that there is a loose coupling, they are independent of each other. But when you create objects, are they not dependent on each other? Now I'm creating the object. To create this object, I need this class. Or probably I was using a better way of doing this. In the last example, I did this. I have an interface. Then I'm creating the object and storing into the interface reference. Is it not a dependency? Is it not a dependency? Because to create this object, we need this dot class file. So is it not a dependency? It is still a dependency, right? So now why I am saying that, I ensured that there is a loose coupling between the components. The only thing is I separated the Java program, I separated the piece of code and I stored into a separate file. I separated the piece of code, I stored into a separate file. There is no independency there. There is still a dependency. The dependency is what? Creation of object. To create the object, you need a dot class file. So still you see a dependency there. There is no independent there. Still you see a dependency there. How do we solve this problem? How do we solve the problem is, suppose, let's take this service class. So what did I have? I have an interface, iService. I have an interface, iService. And in this I have three methods. Then I created a class, service, implements iService. Then in this, what I'm doing, I'm happily doing this. IDAO. I'm creating a DAO. Then I'm saying, it probably says there is a independency. Now where is the independency? You are creating the object and you say independency. There is no independency. It is a dependency only still. Still there is a dependency. Right? How do I overcome this problem? I'll tell you a solution to it. I have an interface. Then I have a class. So there are two classes implementing interface. There is a Hibernate DAO implementation. There is a JDBC DAO implementation. Now, this is your earlier approach. This is your earlier approach. You have a service, and in the service you are creating a DAO object. This is your previous approach, and this is still there is a dependency there. Now you observe the smart way of doing with the Spring. What I do is, I won't be creating any DAO object. I just say a reference. Then I am defining a constructor here. Now this constructor is initializing the reference, or I will have a getter and setter methods too, or I can say setter methods. I don't need getter method. So let me do that. Public void set done. So what do you have? Then you can have your rest of the methods. Then you can have your rest of the methods. Now, if you observe this class, do you know whether Hibernate DAO object is passed or JDBC DAO object is passed? Let's observe here. There is an interface IDAO. There are two implementations. People can use JDBC implementation, people can use Hibernate implementation. But look at the service method here. Suppose if you look at our old service method without Spring, if you are using, you can tell whether JDBC implementation is used or Hibernate implementation is used. You can see whether JDBC implementation or Hibernate implementation. But look at the new service implementation. Can you tell me, can you guess what implementation I am using? Am I using a JDBC implementation or Hibernate implementation? Are you guys following it? You just need to understand, the scenario what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to explain. If I'm using the previous case, the way I did in the previous examples, the last three examples, I was creating the object and storing into an interface reference. Then I'm calling, there is a independency. But where is the independency? If you want to create an object, you need to have a respective .class file with you. There is still a dependency. No, I agree with one thing that you separated the programs. Persistence logic you write in one program, service logic you write in another program. But still, to create object also there is a dependency. Creation of object is also a dependency. Because to create an object, you need the respective .class file with you. Whereas if you observe the next piece of code, you cannot say whether I am passing JDBC DAO object or Hibernate DAO object. There is a loose coupling there. Yeah. So the people whoever looks at this code, they will be in a no position to tell you whether I am using the Hibernate implementation or JDBC implementation. Now the next challenge is, how do we inject object here? How do we pass object? And that's what your Spring framework is all about. So there are many modules of the Spring. There is an IOC module. There is a Spring JDBC. There is a Spring ORM. There is a Spring MVC. There is Spring AOP. So we will be discussing only these four, not AOP. Right. So first let me talk about IOC. What is IOC says? Inversion of control. Now what is this inversion of control and what is this? There is one more thing. DI. DI is not a module. Dependency injection. Dependency injection. You have an IOC, inversion of control. You have DI, dependency injection. IOC is for inversion of control, DI is your dependency injection. So let's speak about it. Okay. What is that we need to look at? Spring, right? Okay. Java. For basic understanding of the Spring, you can look at this tutorial called tutorialspoint.com. But if you want more complicated examples, then you can look at this site mkyong. So for any Spring solution, he'll help you with. This guy has written a lot of examples on Spring. Okay, so I'll tell you what exactly it is. So what is your inversion of control is? Simple. Don't create object, rather inject it at runtime. Don't create the object, rather inject the object at runtime. That's what Spring says, right? And there are actually three ways of injecting the object. There are three ways of injecting the object. 1, 2, and 3. The first one is constructor injection, setter injection, and your method injection. Whereas Spring supports the first two. Spring supports the first two, constructor injection and setter injection. Spring supports the first two, constructor injection and the setter injection. Yeah. Overview architecture, hello world example, IoT container. So there is a constructor injection and also there is a setter injection. So on the whole, what we're going to do here is we're going to write a XML file. We're going to write a XML file. It can be any name. You can do beans.xml. And in this, we're going to configure bean tags. Alright. And in this bean tag, we're going to specify the object name and for which object the class is being created, or for which class, this object belongs to which class. Right. Now, this is how you object created. Then you're going to tell me what is the scope of this project. Is it a singleton or is it a prototype? Singleton in the sense every time you call it gives you the same object. Prototype in the sense every time you call it gives you a new object. Every time you call it gives you a new object. So what we're going to do is, this is in the XML file. So whenever you need the object, this is your public static void main. Now in this, there will be some object called application factory, or there is some factory object or whatever. I'll discuss that. Some object dot get bean. What is the object name? X. That's it. You get the object X, Y, Z. You got the object. You are not creating the object, understand? This is your main method. Now you want to inject that object there, right? Here. Wherever you want to pass that object, you can pass it. So we can pass using constructor, or we can also pass using setter. We're going to see those examples. So here, this is your Spring container, IOC. Okay, as I said, right, there is a bean factory container, there is an application context container. So you have two types of containers. So bean factory is very limited, application context is vast. Means it's only bean factory is very limited. When I say limited, you cannot scale it to a large applications. Whereas Spring application context, it can be scalable to large applications. Then he spoke about a lot of things, how long the bean. I just spoke about bean life cycle. There is a scope and there is a prototype, right? The bean definition, how do you define, and all the stuff he has given you. And here he explains you what is dependency injection. So here string also is available in two shades. One is 2.5 and 3. Plus 2.5 is XML based and 3 is your annotation based. String 2.5 is XML based and string 3 is annotation based. And you can look at this. There is a class text editor and you have a spell checker, and text editor constructor is taking a spell checker. So it's a constructor way of injecting, or you can also use, that's what your dependency injection. Constructor based dependency injection or setter based dependency injection. You can inject the object using a constructor, or you can inject the object using the setter method. So just give me a minute, let me show you some examples of the string IOC. Okay, let's see if our files is string. Okay, I'll be just showing you the program code. I cannot run the code because I don't have the jars currently downloaded, and I'm sure it will take a lot of time for me to download the jar files because the speed of the internet is very, very slow. So let me demonstrate some examples for you. Okay, see, there is an XML file and there is a source package. So let me open these things. I'll be running the program in the next class. So just have a look at this for time being, and I run the program in the next one. Yeah. Here we go. I have a class A and it got two variables, message and a user message, and there is a constructor for one and there is a setter method for another one. I have a class A, it got two variables, message and a user message. Right. So I'm assigning one of them using a constructor and other one I'm using a setter method. So you have different options here. Yeah. I'm using a constructor here. Look at this. I have a constructor and I have a method which is printing the values of the variables. So I got a class A, and the class A got a constructor. The constructor is initializing the values, and I have a method which is printing the values. Fine, no issues. Alright. Okay. Then comes, there is another program called B. If you look at this, now this B also got two variables, but one is of object type, right? And there is a constructor, and you have this, right? So they are not complicated code. It's a very simple code you have, right? So you got a class A, which got two variables, and you got a constructor assigning the values, and you got a method displaying the values. Then you got a class B, and in the class B you got a variable of type A and a string variable of type string, and you got a constructor initializing the values and a method printing them. Now look at the main method. What I am doing here. There is an XML file which you are trying to open, and with the help, it's similar to your Hibernate. You did right. New configuration.configure.build session faculty. Same similar stuff here. You have there is an XML file called application context.xml, and you are using that XML file to create an object. Then you said get bean. Right? And on that you are invoking the method m2. So you're getting what? An object of type B. You're getting an object of type B. But where did I create an object? Did I say B1 equal to, did I say this? No, I didn't do this. Then from where do I get this object? And I said, what is IOC? Inversion of control. Don't create object. Specify how the object needs to be created. And object can be injected at runtime. Don't create object, rather inject it at runtime. But you need to specify how to create object. Don't create object, specify how to create it. Right, specify how to create it, rather and inject it at runtime. So you're going to see how. So the heart of the application is XML file. If you look at this XML file, in this XML file you are specifying an object. You are specifying an object. Now you know that if you look at the class A, observe the class A carefully, there is a constructor with two string arguments. And you look at this. You have a bean tag, and you are creating an object of the class A, and it is A1. Now within the opening and closing of the bean tag, you got constructor hyphen arg tag, and they are taking what? Some values, hello string and hello Arunkan. So the first two, there are actually if you look at the class A again, this is a constructor taking two strings. The first one is a string, the second one is a string. The first one is a string, the second one is a string. And here we go. Two string arguments. So what is happening? So in the XML, you specify that whenever somebody creates object of class A, these are the arguments which goes to the constructor. So when you say in the main method get bean of B1, so you are trying to get B object. But here I specified how to create A object. Similarly, I can also specify how to create B object. And look at this. Now this, when you look at the B class, what do you have in the B class? B class also got a constructor which takes of A type and a string type. Which takes of what type? A type and a string type. Which takes a A type as well as a string type. Now look at this, what is happening? So the B class constructor, look at this, this is a B object creation. This is a B object creation, and here you specify that it's not value, it is a reference, because A is not a simple type, A is another class object. So the first argument is of A type, the second argument is of string type. For the second argument, you just pass value. Whereas for the first one, you are passing what? A1. And you are not using the attribute value, you are using the attribute reference. So this is what referring to the object which is created before. This is what referring to the object which is created before. So I hope you understood when I say what IOC is. Don't create objects, specify how to create it. And we inject it at runtime. How do we inject it at runtime? This is how, when you say main.java, you said bean factory dot get bean of p1. You are able to call it. Now you look at this. Where is your XML file? XML file is not in the source folder. It is in the project folder. So whenever you use bean factory, your XML should lie in the project folder. Whenever you use bean factory, the XML should lie in the project folder. Then in the same example, I think I'll show it again with another one. Look at this. Now where is your XML? Your XML is not in the project now. Your XML is inside a source folder. Your XML is inside a source folder. Now this time you won't be using bean factory, rather you will be using application context. So as I said, right, there are two types of things in the tutorial point. The tutorial points here we saw, not here, IOC containers. We'll come back to that tutorial point here. Look at this. Same stuff. Instead of bean factory, you are creating application context object. As I said here, right, there are two types of container: bean factory container and application context container. So bean factory container is very limited, and it is for those applications which takes very less memory, whereas application context is a large applications. So normally if you take your mobile devices, their memory is very low. So you cannot think of application context container because it needs more memory. So in that case, you go with bean factory. Otherwise, if it is a large application, go with application context. Then if you observe this XML file here of this application, I think I specified a scope attribute here. I said singleton. Since I specified singleton, and you look at the main method, I am calling getBean twice. I call getBean method twice. Now I get the message both are equal. Because when you say singleton, every time you call it, when you say singleton, every time you call it, you get the same option. When you say singleton, every time you call it, you get the same object. But here in the XML file, you go back and modify singleton to prototype. You go back and modify singleton to prototype. Now in this case, you get the message as what? Both are not equal. You get the message as what? Both are not equal. Both are not equal. So it's all about, Spring IOC is what? It's not something new. It's the only thing is, instead of directly using a new operator to create the object, we're going to specify in the XML document how to create object. We're going to specify in the XML document how to create object. That is the only difference. Yeah. Any questions on the little things we discussed about the Spring? Or is it clear? Alright, great. So I would like, okay, I would like to stop here, and I would like to, yeah, yes, I am available from today onwards. So today we had a class, and tomorrow I am going to be available too, right? So I will let you know in case if I am not available, but there is a class tomorrow too. And I will start on time tomorrow. Today I was late by half an hour, but tomorrow I'll be on time. 8 p.m. EST I'll start tomorrow. Right. So I'm going to take questions or whatever the concerns you guys had all these days. You know, in case if you are trying to work with some examples. Unless you don't have any questions on this. Yeah. So first I would like to address any questions on the Spring Framework or whatever I discussed. If you have any questions, I'll discuss that. Later on, I'll move on to the issues what you had. Alright, if you guys have no questions, then what I do is, let's take up those issues which has been pending for long. Right. So Dana, can you help me out what exactly?